Welcome back to the deep dive. We've got some seriously gripping material you sent us this time.
Yeah, this one's
An interview with,
intense.
yeah, it's an interview with a former undercover NYPD officer, Sergeant Steve Lee,
Right.
and he is making some shocking claims
Yeah.
about a really corrupt operation he was involved in.
This isn't just another police corruption story.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sergeant Lee's interview gives us a look,
Right.
a really unsettling look, I think, into undercover police work and particularly the dangers that these officers face when they try to expose this kind of wrongdoing
Yeah.
from within their own ranks.
Okay, well, let's unpack this starting with,
Sure.
can you set the scene for us a little bit?
Right.
What was Lee's mission in this undercover operation?
So Lee was tasked with infiltrating a network of corrupt officers
Oh, okay.
who were engaging in bribery and extortion.
Mm.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Their targets weren't, your typical criminals.
Right.
They were specifically going after Asian gangs and businesses, forcing them to pay for protection or face serious consequences.
So these officers were essentially acting like a mafia, shaking down these businesses for their own personal gain.
Yeah. And Lee describes how he went about gathering evidence.
Okay.
Secretly recording conversations and interactions using his phone.
Talk about risky business.
Oh, yeah.
This is where things get really dark.
Yeah.
Lee discovers a leak within the investigation, and suddenly his life is in jeopardy.
Yeah, someone was tipping off these corrupt officers
Wow.
about what Lee was up to,
Right?
Imagine being in that position. You're surrounded by criminals
Oh, my gosh.
trying to expose this deep-rooted conspiracy, and then you realize that your cover might be blown.
Yeah.
It's really a betrayal that you would expect.
Yeah.
You know.
In a movie, not in real life.
Yeah, in a movie.
It makes you question the entire system.
Right.
Like, who can you trust when the people sworn to uphold the law
Absolutely.
are the ones breaking it?
Yeah, it's very disturbing.
So what happened next?
Well, during a crucial part of the operation,
Yeah.
Lee found himself completely abandoned by his own team.
He was left without backup.
Completely.
Wow.
He says that his commanding officers and handlers were unreachable,
This is insane.
leaving him totally vulnerable and exposed, to be in that position.
Yeah.
Knowing you're surrounded by criminals and the very people who are supposed to be protecting you are nowhere to be found.
Gosh.
It's really a testament to the dangers that undercover officers face when they try to do the right thing.
He even draws a parallel to the infamous bus wars of the past,
Right?
which really highlights the level of danger he was in.
Yeah, the bus wars were a period of intense gang violence
Yeah.
in New York City back in the 80s.
Right.
Notorious for their brutality.
Right.
So Lee's comparison to that era
Yeah.
really underscores the threat that he faced if his cover was blown.
So he's basically saying that if these corrupt officers had discovered his true identity,
Right.
they wouldn't have hesitated to kill him.
And what's even more chilling is his belief that his death could have been easily covered up and blamed on gang violence with no one the wiser.
That is, that paints a terrifying picture
Yeah.
of the situation he was in. So if his own team wasn't there to protect him, who did he turn to?
He actually mentions having to rely on his street friends for protection.
That is just mind-boggling.
It is.
Here's a police officer trying to expose corruption within his own department,
Right.
and he's forced to turn to the very people he's supposed to be investigating for help.
It just shows how desperate this situation had become.
And dangerous.
Yeah, and dangerous.
It really makes you think about the psychological toll that this kind of operation must take on an officer.
Absolutely. To be surrounded by corruption,
Yeah.
not knowing who to trust even within your own team,
Yeah.
that's a whole other layer of paranoia and stress.
So we've established that Lee was in a very dangerous situation. But what about the scope of the corruption he uncovered? Was this just a case of a few bad apples or something more systemic?
According to Lee, the corruption went all the way to the top.
Wow.
He claims there was a steering committee made up of high-ranking NYPD officials,
A steering committee.
chiefs and deputy commissioners,
Wow.
who were actively suppressing investigations into their own colleagues.
You know, as someone who follows these sorts of things, even I was shocked by that detail.
Right.
It makes you question everything you thought you knew about law enforcement.
If true, it would mean that the very system designed to uphold justice
Right.
was actually shielding those who were breaking the law.
And how would they even get away with something like that? Wouldn't there be some kind of oversight or accountability?
That's what makes this so disturbing.
Yeah.
Lee alleges that this steering committee had the power to manipulate internal affairs investigations,
Wow.
essentially burying any evidence that could implicate their own.
So they were essentially untouchable.
It seems that way, at least according to Lee's testimony. Gosh.
And this is just the tip of the iceberg. We haven't even gotten into the gang's perspective on all of this.
Wait, there's more?
Oh yeah, this is where things get really fascinating.
Okay, you mentioned the gang's perspective. I'm really curious to hear about that.
This is one of the most surprising aspects of Lee's story.
Yeah.
He reveals that some of the Asian gang members were actually relieved when these corrupt officers were taken down.
Really? Why is that?
It turns out they had been subjected to relentless extortion. By these officers, they were forced to pay exorbitant sums just to stay in business.
Wow.
So Lee's investigation, in a way, ended up helping the very people he was supposed to be targeting.
So the gangs were actually victims in this whole scheme.
In a sense, yes, they were caught between a rock and a hard place.
Right.
On the one hand, they were criminals themselves involved in illegal activities.
Right.
But on the other hand, they were being systematically exploited by these corrupt law enforcement officers.
That really complicates the whole narrative.
It does. You've got these cops who are supposed to be upholding the law, shaking down these gangs, and then you have the gangs who are benefiting in a twisted way from the investigation meant to take them down.
Yeah, it's a classic example of the blurred lines you often find in cases of organized crime.
Yeah.
This idea of a blue wall of silence
Right.
is something we hear a lot about. But Lee's case shows how it plays out in real life, putting an officer's life in jeopardy.
It's also interesting that the gangs didn't retaliate against these corrupt officers.
Right.
You'd think they would have jumped at the chance to get back at them.
There's a very real reason for that.
Yeah.
The gangs knew that if they retaliated, they would face the full wrath of the NYPD.
Right.
It was a risk they just couldn't afford to take.
So they were trapped in this system of fear and corruption with no real way out?
Exactly. And this brings us to a really important point.
Okay.
The role of whistleblowers like Sergeant Lee.
Yeah.
Without people willing to risk their careers, and in Lee's case, their lives, to expose this kind of wrongdoing.
It would just continue unchecked.
But as we've seen, speaking out against corruption, especially within a powerful institution like the NYPD, can come at a high price.
Yeah.
What kind of risks do whistleblowers face?
They often face retaliation. Ostracism, even threats to their safety. Lee himself mentions fearing for his life, not only from the criminals he was investigating,
Wow.
but also from his own colleagues.
That's a chilling thought.
It is.
Imagine having to constantly look over your shoulder, wondering who you can trust, even within your own department.
It takes an incredible amount of courage to stand up to that kind of pressure.
Yeah.
And it raises a bigger question.
What's that?
How can we better protect whistleblowers so that they feel safe coming forward?
That's a crucial point, because without that protection, people will be afraid to speak out and corruption will continue to flourish.
Absolutely. Whistleblowers play a vital role in holding those in power accountable.
We need to create a system where they are encouraged, not punished, for exposing wrongdoing.
Lee's decision to wear a wire and record those interactions was obviously a huge gamble.
Yeah.
He was essentially betraying his colleagues, people he'd probably worked with for years.
It was a morally complex decision, for sure.
Right.
He had to weigh his loyalty to his fellow officers
Yeah.
against his duty to uphold the law and protect the public.
Right.
It wasn't an easy choice. And it speaks to the difficult ethical dilemmas undercover officers often face.
It makes you wonder how you maintain your own moral compass.
Right?
When you're constantly surrounded by deceit and manipulation. How do you stay true to yourself in that kind of environment?
It's a tough question, and there's no easy answer.
Right.
But it highlights the need for strong oversight and clear ethical guidelines for undercover operations.
Yeah.
We need to ensure that these officers have the support and guidance they need to navigate these complex moral challenges.
And the psychological support.
Right.
We can't forget about the mental and emotional toll this kind of work takes.
You're right. We need to do a better job of recognizing the trauma that undercover officers often experience and providing them with the resources they need to cope and heal.
There's another aspect of Lee's account that I found particularly unsettling.
Okay.
He mentions that he was left completely alone without any backup during a crucial part of the operation. He actually had to rely on those street friends we talked about earlier for protection.
Yes, and this raises some very serious questions about the NYPD's handling of this case.
Yeah.
Why was he left so vulnerable? Was it a deliberate attempt to silence him, or was it simply gross incompetence?
Either way, it's a shocking failure of protocol, and it speaks to a level of disregard for his safety that is simply unacceptable.
And it makes you wonder what other risks undercover officers are being exposed to
Right.
if they can't even rely on their own team for support.
This whole situation has really made me think about the complex relationship between law enforcement and the communities they serve. On one hand, we need the police to protect us from crime. But on the other hand, when officers abuse their power, it erodes public trust and makes it harder for them to do their jobs effectively.
You've hit on a really important point. It's a delicate balance.
Right.
And cases like this really highlight the need for greater transparency and accountability within law enforcement agencies.
We need to be able to trust that the police are acting in our best interests
Absolutely.
and that there are mechanisms in place to hold them accountable when they don't.
Lee's story is a stark reminder that we can't just take that trust for granted.
Right.
We need to be vigilant in demanding accountability and supporting those who are brave enough to speak out against injustice.
It's a story that's both inspiring and deeply disturbing.
It is.
It shows the power of one person to make a difference, but it also exposes the deep-seated flaws within the system.
Lee's account leaves us with a lot to think about.
Yeah.
And it's a conversation we need to continue having if we want to create a more just and equitable society.
This experience really must have had a profound impact on Sergeant Lee.
Absolutely.
I keep coming back to the risk he took, to expose all of this corruption.
Yeah.
I mean, he put everything on the line, his career,
Mm-hmm.
his reputation, his life.
It's extraordinary,
Yeah.
It really begs the question,
Yeah.
what motivates someone to do that?
Yeah, what drives someone to become a whistleblower?
Right.
They almost feel like a moral obligation to expose the truth,
Mm-hmm.
even if it means facing some pretty serious consequences.
Exactly. A sense of duty, a belief that the public has a right to know
Yeah.
what's going on, even if it's something that those in power want to keep hidden.
But as we've talked about, there's often a high price to pay
Yeah.
for that kind of truth-telling.
Huge price.
So
Okay.
Lee's story really highlights the need, I think,
Absolutely.
for stronger legal protections for these whistleblowers.
Right.
We need to make it safer for people to come forward with information
Yes.
about wrongdoing without fear of retaliation.
We need to make it so that speaking truth to power is encouraged and not punished.
Right. And that means providing these whistleblowers with the legal and emotional support they need
Yeah,
to navigate what can be a really difficult and isolating process.
definitely.
This whole conversation has made me think about the responsibility we all have as citizens to hold those in power accountable.
Right.
We can't just assume that these systems are working the way they should.
No.
We need to be, informed,
Yeah.
engaged, and willing to speak up when we see these injustices.
Apathy and silence just allow corruption and abuse of power to flourish.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's up to all of us to demand that transparency and accountability
Mm.
from our institutions and our leaders.
One thing I haven't been able to shake is there's still so many things we don't know about this case.
Right.
This interview leaves us with so many unanswered questions.
Like what happened to Sergeant Lee after he blew the whistle?
Right. Did he face any retaliation?
Yeah. Was he ever able to find peace?
What about the officers that he exposed?
Right. Were they ever held accountable?
Yeah. Did anything actually change as a result of his actions?
Right. It's like we want to know more, but at the same time, we kind of understand that some of these stories never have a neat and tidy resolution.
That's true.
That's just the nature of these complex situations.
Right.
But even without all the answers, Lee's story is a powerful reminder of the importance of courage, integrity, and the pursuit of justice.
It is.
It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the systems we rely on and the people we trust with power.
It's been a really intense deep dive,
Yeah.
but it's also been incredibly eye-opening.
It really gives us a glimpse, I think, into a world that most of us will never see,
Right.
where the lines between right and wrong can become blurred and the pursuit of justice can come at a great personal cost.
I'm left with a lot to ponder. What about you? What will you take away from Sergeant Lee's story?
I think for me, it's a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, one person can make a difference.
That's a good takeaway.
And that speaking truth to power is a responsibility we all share.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.